This isn't what I had expected of myself. What am I doing right now? I'm 25, unemployed. But it was only when I actually arrived in China, it was like...
In this episode of the Level Asian podcast, we chat to Amy, aka Blondie in China.
Friend of a friend of a friend worked at the ABC in Australia, and she wanted to do an interview with someone who was influencing in China. We'll call it influencing, you know. So she interviewed me, and because of the reach of the article and because it's there on Google, when someone types in Australian influencer in China, I was the first person to come up.
Hello, 大家好，我是来自澳大利亚的 Amy.
Tourism departments were getting in touch, asking, hey, come and make a video and post it on your channels in China. So I traveled Australia for some time doing some really cool things, but what I really wanted was to make videos in China for a foreign audience to show people what life in China really is. And I felt like that would have more of a positive impact. There was a period at the beginning of the pandemic that it was kind of like, oh, just a few months and everything will be back to normal. But then when things really started to get a bit more serious, I had to think no job and no clear goal or direction.
Before we get started on today's episode, we would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which this podcast is recorded, the land of the Darug people. We would like to acknowledge and pay respects to our elders past and present and the next generation coming through. Now, onto today's episode. Welcome to the podcast, Amy. For those who are watching this podcast or haven't seen Amy's content or have seen Amy's content before, you don't look like our typical guest.
Yes.
But we've both been avid followers of you for a long time now. I think Can's been following you a little bit longer than I have. But you've got an incredibly interesting story that we would love for you to share. Obviously, where are you based right now?
So I am currently in China. So hello from China. I am kind of splitting my time between Beijing and Chongqing. So most people will know where Beijing is the capital of China. But Chongqing, it is a smaller city in the northeast of China.
Like, I remember actually following you, Amy, when you were less than 100,000 subscribers.
Oh.
Yeah, I was like, I'm an OG.
Yes, you are.
And it was just because of, like, I guess the combination of like the novelty of someone who is a foreigner who genuinely wanted to learn and understand China. Because I think there's this interest in China now, but it wasn't quite like that many, many years ago, right? Like, I think the craze was always around Japan or Korea and some of these more other mainstream East Asian countries. And I think you were one of the first creators that I discovered who just, you could sort of see the enthusiasm and the love for it as well. So I generally loved following along and then obviously learning a little bit further about sort of your background as well. Now, one of the things, and I'm just going to, a bit of trivia, I guess, I don't know if this is like common knowledge, but the first thing I when I was looking into things, I was like, oh, she's a cheerleader for an NRL team, and now she's like traveling in China. So, so are you able to give a little bit of context there, and then maybe we'll segue into like how the whole thing started and how you got into China?
Yeah, so cheerleading was one of those great things that happened in my life. I used to work at a shoe store, and the head coach of the cheerleading team, she came in one day looking for some shoes, and while I went out the back to get her shoes, I came back and she was like, oh, I have to ask, have you ever danced before? And I have a background of dancing, so I was like, yes, I have. And she invited me along to tryouts. And, you know, at the time I was working at a bank and I did have a certain amount of like anxiety about, oh, you know, what would my workmates think about this if they saw it? But I just remember at the time, this was now around 10 years ago, I just thought, you know, opportunities like this don't come around. I'm sure there's a reason why this has come into my life. And I just jumped for it. And it was one of the best things. It was this amazing girl gang and that built each other up, and a lot of confidence came from it. And performing in front of a stadium of people, you know, I'm no professional dancer, but I feel like it's rare to have that kind of performance in front of thousands and thousands of people. So it was incredible. Absolutely no regrets about that. But yeah, that was before my vlogging days started.
Yeah. Well, then speaking of even before vlogging, my understanding, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, was you'd done sort of a year of study, or you were studying in China at the time. Was that sort of when the first, I guess, interest in China started, or can you tell us where it all actually started?
Oh, my interest with China kind of came in stages. So it originally started, in my final year of high school. So one of the topics for the HSC that I was doing was modern history. And the teacher that I had, my modern history teacher, she had such a passion for one of the topics, which was modern China. So that was kind of my first entry point to it. And she had such a passion for it that really sparked my own passion for it, resulting in me doing my own research and extra readings and just really finding it fascinating. At the same time, many of my classmates were from China. So I just felt this sense of, oh, this is so cool, learning more about their country. And when it came time to choose majors for university, because it was just literally at the time I was studying that course was when it was time to what do I want to do? What university do I want to go to? And I thought, you know what? Let's learn Mandarin. It'll never be a bad skill to have. So I decided my first preference was for UNSW to do a Commerce International degree, which basically is kind of like two majors that you can choose, one from the International Studies department and one from the Commerce department. So I majored in both marketing and Chinese studies. And because of that, because I had Chinese studies, it offered me the opportunity to go to China for a year as an exchange student. So to be honest, at first, learning Mandarin, I definitely loved learning the language. And at the time, I was like, oh, this is going to be really good for my future, being in business, because that's what I'd always imagined that for myself, being a high-powered businesswoman, but being a high-powered businesswoman and knowing Mandarin. But it was only when I actually arrived in China that it was like, oh, wow, I really like it here. And that was when my interest became, I guess you could call, a love affair. I just loved everything about the country. It surprised me in so many ways. If I could go back to any time of my life, it would be to go back to that period in 2014 at Fudan University in Shanghai, where I studied for a year as an exchange student, and just, meeting new people, learning about another culture, improving my Chinese skills, interacting with local people, traveling. It really opened my eyes. So for anyone out there that is considering, oh, should I do a gap year or exchange, I'd say go for it, because I don't think there's anything as enriching as traveling to another country that is different from your own and seeing how other people live and how other cultures operate, because it's not all the same. Just because you're from Australia doesn't mean the rest of the world is like Australia. So I think going to China was a really humbling experience. It taught me a lot about the world. It showed me that there's so much more out there. And it was during that year as an exchange student that I was like, yeah, I want to pursue a future in China. At the time, I had no idea what that would look like. I was studying business at the time. So it was like, oh, do I want to do, work in a company here, whatever. But yeah, so that was when the manifesting began. And here I am sitting in Northeast China all these years later.
Crazy.
Everything that you studied, essentially, like I know that you said you did modern history and then you studied it in university a little bit. So then when you first went to China and experienced that, was it the same as what you studied or something completely different?
Oh, well, I think when you're studying history, you're studying a different world, a different time, a different environment. So no, it was very different because it was the China very much of the future. When I arrived in Shanghai, the Shanghai Tower was halfway through being built. And I can't even explain to you how surreal it was. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Shanghai Tower. It's one of the major super tall buildings on the Bund, that very iconic, backdrop of Shanghai. And when I got there, this massive building, which is now one of the tallest or one of the tallest buildings in Asia, was halfway through being built. And I just, surrounded by these mammoth buildings, and it was so high tech. It's even more high tech now. Shanghai is going it's so fast, the speed of development. But I just remember sitting there like, wow, this is just another world, another layer of, high tech kind of thing. Yeah, so I have to say Shanghai, that was where I was based. It surprised me in many ways because my main kind of entry point to China, or what I knew about China, mostly came from media in Australia. So I'm talking the news. And, I'm sure we all know that the picture we see on the news of China isn't exactly the most positive one. So when I actually arrived in China, it wasn't this hugely polluted, gray, kind of overpopulated vibe. I I think I had a lot of surprises coming to China because it was just very different from what I was expecting. And as I said in the beginning, learning Mandarin was more like, oh, this will be really good for my future. I never expected that the country would really shift everything, my whole life path, because I just really, really love the country that much. So it's been a journey, that's for sure. Like I felt like my life was heading in one direction, and then suddenly it's gone in a completely other direction that I never could have imagined my life would go in. But yeah, I'm glad I did.
Yeah, look, as you were describing that, I was like thinking back to the first time I'd gone to China by myself. So, being Chinese background myself, Viv and I are actually from the same province. We're both from Fujian. And Viv's you're from Fuzhou, which I know you've been to, Amy. And I come from actually a smaller city called Lyon, which is a bit more sort of inner mountain city, near where the earthen buildings are, which is Tulou, and a lot of the Hakka people live.
Yeah.
And the reason why I sort of give that context was both she and I, we talk about this a lot, is growing up, we would go back and we'd visit families, and it's this concept of tanqing, which basically means visit your relatives. However, I remember the story very vividly, which was like a friend of mine he bought tickets with another friend to go to Shanghai. And that friend of his bailed on him for some strange reason. I said, I'll go with you. And I remember going to Shanghai, and I had the same sort of impact as yourself, which was like, I'm in this mega city, and it felt very much like the future. It was these, sort of megalithic buildings. It was like high tech. But on the flip side, there was also, I had a strange experience of where, being sort of someone who grew up in a Western country, but looking Asian, I felt some sense of identity fitting in, but at the same time, not completely, because the language, I can speak Mandarin and I can get by, but, if I go any deeper in conversation, then I tend to struggle as well. But certainly from an impact perspective, I feel like there's a lot of people that I know who's sort of felt this way about China, where they've gone there and gone, okay, the perception is completely different to what I know of it, based on media. And it's this sort of new and exciting sort of thing about what's happening there as well. Can you sort of give us a bit of a timeline? Like what year was it that you went to Shanghai? And then just, if you can take us along after that 1 year, and then how it sort of transgressed into now you being a content creator, or was there something in between that happened as well?
Oh, so many things in between. So 2014 was my year being there as an exchange student. So, that was my year that I really got caught up with my Mandarin level, because, learning in Australia in university, you have 1 or 2 classes a week. It's not even close to getting you to a level of fluency in Mandarin, which is one of the hardest languages in the world. So arriving in Shanghai, that was definitely a shock. It was, oh my goodness, I've been learning this language for 2 years and I cannot communicate. So being in the environment definitely got my ear in, and by the time I left, I had a lot more confidence than when I arrived. Enough confidence to actually participate in this Chinese language show for foreigners called Chinese Bridge, Hanyiqiao, in 2015. So the year after I arrived back from China. And, my Chinese skills were better than they'd ever been before. I was like, yeah, I'm ready to compete. I made it through a lot of rounds in Australia, and I ended up being one of the few Australian representatives to go to China and be on this TV show watched by millions of people. It just blew my mind. And it's kind of like The Voice for language learning. So you're competing with people from literally all over the world. And I remember just the most surreal experience, because usually when you're traveling and you're around foreigners, the shared common language is English. But it was so interesting being in an environment that the shared language is Chinese. So you'd be talking to someone from England, from South Africa, from Zimbabwe, and you're all using Chinese to communicate. That was such a cool feeling. I participated in that show. I went a lot further than I thought I would. I made it to the top 15 contestants, which was just very unexpected. And because of that, my prize for getting to that stage was a 1-year scholarship to study at a university of my choice in China and study Mandarin. Anyway, so I kind of put that in my back pocket, went back to Australia, graduated in 2016 from UNSW, and then started working on more of a full-time basis after I graduated. And I was working at a bank. It was an incredible opportunity. It was exactly the job that I had always imagined for myself. And, I just remember not fully feeling myself in that role and not feeling optimal levels of happiness. And I one day just wrote down, like, what do I wish for my life? What do I want? And I remember writing down, I want to be outside more. I want to be my own boss. I want to be in China. I want to be speaking Mandarin. I want to be creative. I want to feel like I'm doing something that makes a difference. So I thought, you know what, I've got this scholarship in my back pocket. Let's go to China and see where it takes me. So 2017, I enrolled myself at Tsinghua Tsinghua University. It's actually the number one university in China. I was like, if I can choose any university, of course I'm going to choose the number one. So to this day, whenever anyone in China asks me, what university did you study at? I say, oh, Tsinghua University. And they're always like, oh my gosh. Because to go to Tsinghua, if you're Chinese, it would be like 10 times harder than someone from America attending Harvard, because there's just so many people in China. It's the best university. It's only the cream of the crop. I did nothing really to get myself there except have this scholarship. So I feel like when I tell people I studied there, it's not well deserved. I just had a scholarship and I studied Mandarin for a year there. And that was a very pivotal time of my life because I was 25. At that stage, I think I went to a private girls' school, and definitely they encourage, success and, strive for the best. And being 25, no job, studying again, I felt this sense of like, not disappointment in myself, but I felt like I'd kind of come off the tracks. And even though it was going to take me to a better place, I had a lot of fighting inside myself about like, this isn't what I had expected of myself. Comparing myself to my friends at the time, investment bankers and doctors and lawyers, I just felt like what I was doing was very different. And it did have somewhat of an impact inside of me. Like, what am I doing right now? I'm 25, unemployed, and I have no clear goal or direction. But I figured since I was there to learn Mandarin, no time would be wasted because I'm there learning a valuable skill and improving my Mandarin. So I would suggest for anyone who is at a time of their life that they're like, oh, I don't know if I love what I'm doing, enroll in a course somewhere because you're never like wasting time because you're always learning. Anyway, it was during that time that I started making videos. I thought, how about I use and leverage some of that social media following that I had gotten on my Weibo account. It's like the Chinese Facebook. From being on that TV show. I had maybe like 2,000 or 3,000 followers. So I thought, okay, let's make videos. Let's see, because I really like photography, and I thought, let's try this out. And at the beginning, I was very strategic in terms of like, so what gap is there in the market? Really using my marketing degree here. What gap is there in the market? What, value can I bring to my customers? And I was like, okay, how about we become a fitness blogger? Because at the time I like going to the gym, I'd just come off 3 years of cheerleading and, I was in good shape, I'll say that. And so I thought, what, let's make some exercise vlogs, but in Chinese for a Chinese audience, which I wasn't really there at the time. And by some luck, one of my first videos went viral. And that really grew my audience. But after a few videos of doing these fitness vlogs, I was like, this isn't what I want to do. Like, I had no fitness qualifications. I was not, a proper resource for fitness. I was just like, hey, this is what I do at the gym. So I stopped doing that and kind of transitioned into more lifestyle and, traveling in China. And then another piece of luck really came my way. A friend of a friend of a friend worked at the ABC in Australia, and she wanted to do an interview with someone who was influencing in China. At the time, I had maybe 15, 20,000 subscribers, but, we'll call it influencing, And so she interviewed me. And because of the reach of the article and because it's there on Google, whenever anyone would type in, I don't know, maybe it's even the case now, when someone types in Australian influencer in China, I was the first person to come up. So even though I didn't really have that big of a following, people knew how to find me, and people knew, okay, if we want to advertise in China, maybe this girl is an option. So that resulted in some really cool opportunities to travel around Australia. A lot of tourism departments were getting in touch, and, local tourism experiences and snorkeling companies and skydiving companies, asking, hey, come and make a video and post it on your channels in China. So I traveled Australia for some time doing some really cool things and realized, wow, like I like this lifestyle. Making videos, I can support myself, I'm making some money. This is great. But I felt like what I was doing at that stage was making videos about Australia for a Chinese audience. But what I really wanted was to make videos in China for a foreign audience to show people what life in China really is. And I felt like that would have more of a positive impact. And it was more what my heart was telling me I want to do that. So it was at that stage in 2018 that I started my YouTube channel. And again, through some luck, one of my first videos went viral, which caused my account to grow. So yeah, since then I've been making a video a week on YouTube. I can't believe it's been 5 years now. And that's what's brought me to here and now. And of course, there's been changes along the way. COVID brought its fair amount of challenges. But without COVID and the time I spent in Australia, I don't know if I would be doing what I'm doing now, which is more food related vlogging. And it's often, honestly, the best thing. I love food vlogging. I love learning about food here in China. It was something I was always interested in. But because of the pandemic and not being able to be in China, it really forced me to explore what I could in Australia that was China related. And Sydney has some of the best Chinese food outside of China, in my opinion. So yeah, that was everything has kind of happened for a reason. I feel like there's been so many things in my path that has brought me to where I am, and grateful for everything, honestly.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like as you were saying that, the thing that comes to mind is like that, what's that quote, which is like, for every overnight success, there's like 10 years of hard work. And I think there's a lot of like meandering that goes through it before you sort of figure out your secret sauce. And I wanted to actually go back to that whole pandemic period, which was the last 2 years prior to this year. And I remember watching your videos, and you were like super creative, because I remember you were stuck here in Australia. You couldn't go back to China, and you do like these walking tours from literally like your home, and you'd bring like, your contacts or your friends from overseas, and they'd be able to like walk you through on what it's like in certain cities and things like that. And that's when I sort of was like, wow, she's like genuinely really passionate, because anyone who probably would have been in your same situation would have probably just stopped then and there, because you're like, well, I can't create content because I'm not in China, and therefore I don't have the option. But you kept going. Did you ever sort of have any, I guess, doubts during that period of time for those couple of years, or was always just, you were clear?
Definitely at the beginning, I don't think any one of us knew how long it was going to go for. There was a period at the beginning of the pandemic that it was kind of like, just a few months and everything will be back to normal. So for the first few months, I was like, okay, it's okay. I'll be going back soon. But then when things really started to, get a bit more serious, I had to think. And I never had a doubt that I wanted to stop doing China content. I think what I had to keep telling myself is pressure makes diamonds, and change sometimes forces you in directions that you yourself wouldn't have taken you in. But when you actually take that path, it brings you to somewhere good. So I just had to trust the process and hope that, what I would start doing would, work out for me for the best. I did have a lot of trouble in the early days thinking of content. So I explored something like cooking at home, and that was fun, but didn't really light my fire. Giving my tips for language learning, it's okay, but doesn't light my fire. And it was actually my dad that suggested, hey, how about we all go out as a family and eat some Chinese food? And I was like, would you be okay with that? Would you be willing? And if you've ever seen my videos with my dad, you'll know his answer was, hell yeah, like, let's do it. He loves the camera. So yeah, we all went out and had malatang as a family, my parents, my sister, myself, and that video went really, really well on my YouTube. And so I think what I've learned from YouTube is when you've got a video that goes well, keep doing it. Whatever you've done, replicate. So the next week, of course, we're eating something else together, Chinese food related. And in Australia, like I always loved food in China, but I'd never really studied it. So at the beginning, I was using what I knew to share with my parents, sharing, Sichuan food is like this, Hunan food is like this, Cantonese food is like this. But at a certain point, I really had to start putting in the work and learning. And the more I learned, the more I was fascinated. So yeah, if it wasn't for the pandemic and, that process, I would probably still be doing travel content. And I love travel content, don't get me wrong. I still love to do it. It's a lot of work to do travel content, and I'm not the best at it. There are seriously gifted videographers out there that get the greatest shots and the stabilized footage, and, I can do my best, but, I can't replicate. But when it comes to food vlogging, I can just give my thoughts and react and just share my genuine opinions. And it's just so fun to make and less stressful and easy to film. And it's the best.
This episode is produced and brought to you by Social Wave. Social Wave is a strategic content marketing agency helping businesses grow revenue using video, podcasts, and SEO. Head on over to socialwave.com.au to find out more. Now back to the show.
Yeah, like I can see, like, I think Viv and I, we've said this before, we're like, the reason why we love watching your videos is like, you're so, like the enthusiasm is like super infectious. And it's always very positive. Even if you don't like the food, there's been moments where like there's certain foods that you don't like as well. But I think, I think the whole vibe of the direction you're taking it is in a really, I guess, positive and a wholesome way as well. Because I think, without, touching on politics, but there's obviously that whole area there that people can sort of really cast a really negative light when it comes to China. I want to actually just sort of make it a bit more relevant also to people listening, because obviously most of our audience is Asian. And growing up, and we hear this a lot on the podcast, a lot of our guests sort of felt not shame, but they didn't want to identify themselves as Asian. Like they weren't proud to be Asian, growing up in a Western country like Australia. They just wanted to fit in. So there were some identity issues there. And so now having someone like yourself who is a Westerner, who has found a real love for an Eastern country like China, is there anything that you can share with us that you were like, well, this is the reason why I love China? Like if I were to sort of distill it down, I know that's a very loaded question. But what I want to sort of achieve out of this question is to go, there's probably, kids or people who are sort of still growing up and trying to figure themselves out. And they're really struggling because they want to fit in and be part of, say, Australia and Western culture. But I think at the same time, I think there's a lot of people who regret not, say, learning Mandarin or, not investing themselves in learning about their culture and their heritage. So I know it's sort of a strange dynamic where this is possibly advice coming from a foreigner, so to speak. But yeah, what would you say to that?
Oh man, it's a big question. Like there's so much that I love about China. I think one of the first things that really got me in was how different it was from Australia, and also just the history. I've always been a history buff. I did 5 units of history for my HSC, modern, ancient, and extension history. So I love my history, and going to a country that has 5,000 years of history, using my Mandarin skills to read words on a tomb site that's 1,000 years old. And I can read it, it was just so deep and interesting. And even walking around a city like Shanghai, walking past certain places that, this is, 1,000 years old, or this is that. And you just don't get that in Australia. So that was one of the things that I was really interested in. And China just has just such proud culture and family trees, and people are proud, very proud to be a part of that family tree. And there are temples, as I'm sure you guys are aware, in China. I saw quite a few of them in the Fujian region, actually, where they're family temples where you can actually go to, and every year there are celebrations for that family name. For example, if your last name is Li, you can go to the Li family temple and be a part of these massive family celebrations. So there's just that sense of ancestry, tracing back your origins, that I think for someone who is Chinese would be just an amazing feeling of belonging and thing to be a part of. But for myself personally, I just have this energy that I feel when I'm in China. And I guess it's the closest thing I could equate it to is maybe that chemistry that you feel with a potential love match. Sometimes the chemistry is higher, sometimes the chemistry is less, sometimes there's no chemistry. I don't know what is in the air, but when I'm in China, I just feel this sense of possibilities and excitement and energy. And some people, when they go to New York, they have that sense of, anything is possible. The world is at my fingertips. When I'm in China, I feel the same way. It's the place I feel most myself, my most energetic, my happiest, my freest. And, I've done a lot of traveling, and I love being in other countries as well. But there's something that just keeps bringing me back to China. And another big part of that is the people. There's a concept in China known as 热情, which basically, it's hard to translate, but it's this Chinese warmth and welcoming nature. People will go so far out of their way to help someone else. In my experiences being in China, I have so many cases that people have just done so much for me to feel welcomed, at home, comfortable, people, really going out of their way to help me. For example, I met a couple randomly in Beijing at a Yunnan restaurant. Yunnan is a province of China, and Yunnan food is quite delicious. And I just started talking with this couple randomly. I was one foreigner in this restaurant, and they, starting conversation. It came up in conversation like, oh, you should come and visit us in Yunnan. Like, we're going back, and,
Wow.
Would love to see you there. And, I've had this happen before, people being like, oh, come visit. But this is the first time that I actually took someone up on their offer. So actually, about a month or so later, I made a video of this experience. So you can check it out on my YouTube. But I flew across the country. I took a plane, a bus, a train. Like, it was kind of remote. And yeah, they basically took me in, and I live with them. And, they took me all around, and the guy drove me around for hours and hours, showing me different things. And it was just that sense of, wow, it was just so lovely. And things like that happen to me all the time in China. People just want to help and make me feel welcome. It does help that I have a foreign face, because people know that I'm obviously not from China. So I think people, to a large extent, are more willing to go out of their way because they can see, oh, this is a foreigner, let's give her a good impression. I can't speak on behalf of people who maybe were raised in Australia and come to China, how their experience would be. I can only talk on behalf of myself, but my foreign friends have a similar story, whether they're, from what country they're from,
Yeah. Well, I think, Viv, maybe you want to touch on this, because I think you stressed to me, you did a prep call with Amy prior to this podcast, which, Amy, I know you were very cognizant of, I guess the way we would sort of call it, I'm not sure if you'd use the same words, but it's like the privilege of being a foreigner in China, right? Like there's a novelty of being, blonde hair, say blue eyes, very different to, your average Chinese. And so therefore you get, sort of quite different attention compared to someone, say, like us who is in China. And we just probably more blend in. So I just wanted to put that there. I don't know, Vid, what your comments are, but I think it's important to point that out, because for the common skeptic on the say someone listening going, oh, well, she's saying she gets all these great experiences in China because, she's a foreigner. But I think at the same time, there's always merit to all of this sort of stuff. So Viv, have you got anything that you wanted to, I guess, add to that?
No, I think you covered it pretty well. But I also, like, Amy, if you want to touch on, because I know when we spoke as well, you wanted to bring this up, but you making videos isn't about you showcasing China in a certain way. It's just your experience, and that's just what you want to share with people. It's a positive experience, and that's what it is. So can you maybe touch on, I guess, what your goal of your channel is as well, and like what kind of story you are sharing?
Yeah. So there's nothing I can do about my appearance. I was born this way, and
Yep.
I am always aware of, these privileges I may enjoy being a foreigner in China. I know I've seen online and from people's experiences, when it comes to the job market, I think there is a privilege being a foreigner, and maybe people will be given that job because they have a foreign face. That I haven't experienced because I have never worked in a company in China. So the biggest privilege that I say I would enjoy in China is just people knowing I'm a foreigner and seeing I'm a foreigner and wanting to go out of their way to help me. I would never take advantage of anyone. I just like to talk and make friends. And I just want to share that on my channel for people that maybe don't understand China, and just give people a more rounded view of China. There's enough negative media about China, and I'm not saying that people shouldn't watch that or shouldn't have thoughts about this, that, or whatever. I'm just saying there are also other parts of the country. China is such a diverse place. I've traveled a lot in China, and everywhere I go, it's a new experience, a new cuisine, a new culture, from village to village, city to city, province to province. So, I would always only want to be respectful, and I definitely always need to keep educating myself about what is, respectful and what pushes the boundary, because the goal of my channel is just to foster cross-cultural friendships and help people from maybe a Western country that doesn't really understand China understand it more and maybe go out of their way more to make more Chinese friends. So I only want to put love out there and help other people understand a culture that maybe they don't understand. And I'm by nature a positive person, and I'm sure that someone else in my shoes that maybe has a more negative viewpoint would be showing different facets of the country. I just choose to see the positive, and I'm just sharing my experience, what I see, because the country has just done so much for me and has welcomed me so beautifully. And I don't think that people from Asia that move to, say, Australia or America would have that similar experience of being welcomed without, just bringing you in for a big hug and saying, hey, we see you're a foreigner, we welcome you. So I just want people to see that side of this country. So that's my main goal with my channel. And I just love traveling and exploring, and it's literally my dream, what I'm living right now, being in China, learning, meeting new friends, eating. Like I honestly couldn't be more lucky. But my experience as a foreigner in China is very different from a Chinese person in China, because there are certain societal expectations and pressures that I don't have to face because I'm a foreigner, like the pressure to be married by a certain age, the pressure to have kids in an economy that's quite demanding in terms of a job schedule and money that you can make to buy a house, buy a car, support your parents, your children. It's a lot. So I am very aware that I have that privilege of not having to face those societal pressures. But my channel is just a reflection of what I experience. But yeah, people should be aware that an experience as a foreigner and experience as a Chinese person in China is different. But I think that's the same with every country. My experience in Australia as an Australian who's was born and raised there is probably going to be different to someone who comes to travel and do an exchange gap year. So, but yeah, I always want to learn and grow, and I always encourage people to reach out and tell me their experiences. And yeah, I can only do my best, and I would never want to hurt or disrespect anybody. So I think it's really important to keep myself educated on this, balance.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess it's like, I don't want to harp on too much about negativity either, because we try and do things in a positive light. So let's do some more of the fun stuff. Let's do some rapid fire, because Viv and I listed out a whole bunch of questions. And one of the ones was just obviously you're being I would say you're more of a food blogger, right? In terms of everything you come up with. So let's just start with the obvious one, like favorite food in China. If you had to sort of choose just one, what would it be?
So this is my least favorite question that I get in interviews, because there's so many foods that I love here. So you sent me the question list before. So I actually have prepared a list. And I'm going to give you categories. So favorite dumpling filling would be egg and chive, or if it's my neighbor making it, pork and fennel. She makes pork and fennel dumpling. Man, that is so good. Favorite noodle would be Chongqing xiaomian from the city of Chongqing. It's spicy, it's salty, it's flavorful, it's mouth numbing. It's the best. But I'd only say that was my favorite if I was in Chongqing, getting it outside of, anyway.
Gotta have it in Chongqing.
My favorite yum cha item would be barbecue pork changfen, the rice rolls with barbecue pork inside. My favorite variety of hot pot would be Chaoshan beef hot pot from Guangdong province.
Nice.
It's just basically beef and more beef, and it's amazing. There's actually a place in Sydney that you can get it. So I made a video about that, so you can check it out. My favorite veggie dish would be disanxian, which is a dongbei dish that is made up of potato, eggplant, and capsicum, and it's deep fried. It's got this sauce. It's amazing. My favorite dessert would be, of course, bingfen. I'm obsessed with bingfen. It's like a jelly. It's got brown sugar syrup on top with all of these different textures and bubbles this and hawthorn that. Oh, so good. Yeah. That's
amazing.
My answer.
Yeah.
I'm getting hungry now.
I agree with the hot pot notion, because everyone gets obsessed about Sichuan hot pot, which is obviously all the spicy and the mala. But I am a massive fan of Taosan, just in general, not just with hot pot as well, just because of
amazing.
It's a food heaven. I think it's one of those things that get overlooked big time when it comes to food locations. they're like incredibly, as a culture, picky with the quality of the food, right? And you've traveled there, you've done videos on it as well. And I remember, my wife, who is from Guangdong, and she knows Taoyuan quite well. She would tell me things about like how, and I think you've touched on this in the video. It's like the beef is like the cow slaughtered in the morning, and the beef literally gets to, the restaurants by like the mornings, and by like early afternoon or even just after lunch, they won't eat that beef for hot pot anymore just because it's not considered like fresh. Pretty insane stuff, right? Like, have you got any sort of, I guess, stories? It doesn't have to be food, but it can just be like general, memorable experiences in China, or just like favorite memories that you've had whilst you've been traveling through.
Oh, so many. Like, I think food is a great conduit to learn a culture. So I've definitely had so many interesting experiences around food. And as you say, it's people are so specific because the culture has been building for thousands of years. These places have been eating and developing their cuisine for thousands of years. So, for example, when it comes to Chaoshan beef hot pot, it's just so specific about the cut of beef they use, how it's cut, sliced, what dipping sauce to use it with, and it's always so humbling eating a food that has thousands of years of history. It always makes me very aware of how insignificant I am, but I just feel very honored to be there and trying this food that has been handed down from generation to generation to generation, which is something that you don't get in Australia because, we don't really have that Australian food culture. But also I'm very grateful for having grown up in Australia and having access to so many different cultural foods. So that's also been a great experience. So, can't hate on Australian food that much because we also have so many amazing cultures. Interesting experiences. Like, my favorite experiences are the ones that bring me closer to people. And by far, the most amazing experience has been growing this beautiful relationship with my neighbors in Beijing. So about a year and a half ago, I moved into my hutong house. So hutong is like an alleyway between residential compounds, the old school style residential compounds in Beijing. So they have thousands of years of history, or maybe 1,000 years of history. Anyway, I need to read up on that. But I have always wanted to live in the hutongs because they're so representative of old Beijing, and you have a lot of people living there that have amazing stories to tell. So I decided, I'm going to move into my hutong. So I chose this place, and I still remember the first day I moved in, my neighbors that I'm very close with, Ayi and Shushu, basically just means auntie and uncle. That's what I called them. They popped their heads out and they were like, at first they didn't know I could speak Mandarin, and they were like, hello, like they tried to communicate in English, and I was like, 没事没事我会说中文. So that was great. We could have like an exchange, and they were like, anything that we can do to help, just let us know. We're just here, just pop in. And over the next few months, we really developed this friendship and going for walks with each other through the neighborhood, going out to eat foods. It got to the point where she would start bringing me lunches every day, like, here's some baozi, here are some dumplings. And then the next step was every night now when I'm in Beijing, I eat dinner with them. And to be brought into this family environment and feel just so welcomed, it's the purest form of cultural exchange I can imagine. We sit there and we talk about how weddings are like in China compared to Australia. When my boyfriend came to visit, Shushu and my boyfriend Diak got along so well, having some drinks, and Diak was sharing Jägermeister from Germany, Shushu was sharing Baijiu from China, and it's just learning about all these different cultures and experiences, but they've just welcomed me with open arms, and that's been probably the most amazing experience being in China, being almost like welcomed into a family. It's hard to form words about it, but they're beautiful people. So beautiful. And I just want to show people that side of China, because it's not a side that you see too much in mainstream media. So just trying to fill in the blanks a little bit,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's talk about, and this might be similar to the food question, is like your favorite place in China. So this can be either like a city, it could be a landmark, it could be like just an area you visited. Like, is there any sort of standouts or like a top list?
It's really hard because I have so many connections to so many places. Mm-hmm. I love Shanghai. It's probably my favorite city in the world. And I think a lot of that is because it was my first entry point to China, and I have so many memories there, and it's a very meaningful place for me. Beijing, I am coming to love more and more every day. I think Beijing is a place that you need to know people and you need to live there for a period of time to truly understand. But, you know, I love my food. And the south of China for me is where it's really at. So Guangdong province is probably the place that I would really like to spend more time, because even within one province of Guangdong, it's so diverse. I mean, if you go to the Chaoshan region and go to cities like Shantou, it's going to be so different from Guangzhou. It's a very different food culture. And I just find it so interesting that there's beef in food culture, even within one province. I mean, Chaoshan region, they like their zhou, their congee, to be made with broken grains of rice. But in Guangzhou, the congee must be made with unbroken grains of rice. And both sides feel very passionately about how congee should be prepared. And I always just find it fascinating, like, whoa, like it's you know, it's something I can't understand, because for me it's just it's congee, you know, it's rice pudding, rice porridge, but it's cool to experience and try one side and try the other, and like just be able to enjoy a culture from like an outsider perspective.
Yeah, like I think about because I spent about 3 months, and this was just before the pandemic, where I traveled through China, and I always wanted to do it. So like you are essentially living my dream. So I feel like personally my most fond memories were two places. Number one was actually in Guangxi, which I know you were recently there. You know, the rolling Cast Mountains, you know, the Li River. I was in Kunming for about a couple of weeks, I think it was. And it was like one of the most beautiful places, just because of, I think, just the balance between like natural beauty, which was, you know, for me, nature is really important. But then obviously the food, like the food in Guangxi is like incredibly like underrated, because, you know, you get Guangdong, which is, you know, Cantonese food, and, you know, highly, you know, popular because that's where the migrant waves came from. But Guangxi, you know, you talk about luo sifen, which is, you know, like a very famous and very pungent noodle that a lot of Chinese people eat as well. So that was number one. And then number two was eventually near the end of my trip, I was also in Yunnan. And I spent time in like, you know, Dali and then Lijiang. And then we even managed to go up to like Tibetan borders near Shangri-La as well, and Tiger Leaping Gorge and sort of these types of places. And it's just like, as you said, like, I feel like China is, you just can't encapsulate China into like a single, you know, description. Like it's 1 second you got the mega cities, the next second you got like pure just nature. And then talking about even just like the different minority cultures, you know, there's so many, and they're all sort of, I guess, recognized by the government now. So they spend time making sure that they sort of support and preserve a lot of this stuff. So I spent 3 months there, certainly not as long as you did, but I was like, I barely scratched the surface. You know, and like even my own backyard of Fujian, just trying to get my head around like everything there. Just honestly like you would need basically a lifetime, probably multiple lifetimes, to actually really explore everything that's there. Yeah.
Like Fujian is one of the more diverse provinces. I've never been to a province that has so many local dialects. From one village to another in Fujian province, they're completely different languages, and most people in Fujian province, they will speak Fujianhua, like the Fuzhouhua, or like the local biggest city dialect, their local village dialect, and also Mandarin. So living in Fujian province, it's like, it's a lot of languages.
Yeah, because I have like my parents who would speak Longyanhua, which was the city that they grew up in, but then they've got my grandparents who come from different counties, and each county would have its own dialect.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you've got Fujianhua, which probably is like the most mainstream, which is also what a lot of people call Minanhua, which obviously Taiwanese people also speak a somewhat derivative of that. So it's just insane. Like, I remember like every time I growing up, if my parents didn't want me to like hear something, they'd just speak in a local dialect, and I wouldn't understand it. But yeah, like it's pretty fascinating that province to province as well, things are very significantly, I guess, different. I guess sort of not just reflecting now, but like looking forward, what are sort of the plans for yourself? You know, have you got some, you know, new locations that you're going to be exploring? What are you looking forward to? Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah. For me, I just want to follow the happiness, like if I'm happy, that's where I need to be. So right now I'm incredibly happy and feeling incredibly blessed, and I will keep doing what I'm doing until I feel like a change needs to happen. So I think maybe in the next few years, I'll start expanding my a little bit more, maybe doing more food content from other Asian countries, because I recently was just in Korea and I made a couple of videos from Korea, and it ignited that fire again. I was like, oh, it's just nice to be experiencing new things and traveling in a new place. And I think maybe in the future I will look at, expanding a little bit. I always want to keep my focus on China because I spent so long here and I have the most knowledge here. And I feel like the videos that I'm able to make in China can go to that other level because I know the local language and I have that communication ability. But definitely looking outside of China a little bit would be really exciting. I'm actually in a couple of weeks, 10 days from today, going to be going to Italy for a 6-week walking trip with my family. So definitely looking forward to making some videos there. It'll be interesting making European food content. And so I'm interested to see what my audience thinks of that. But I'll be with my family. So that'll be really, really great. So yeah, the future, I'm not really too sure what it's going to bring, to be honest. Right now, I'm really happy, traveling around China and discovering more about this place. And but I know there's probably going to be a point where I've been to every province and every city. And, even if you've been to every city and every province, there's always more to discover. There would be a lifetime of adventures here in China. But yeah, I think I'm just going to go with the flow. I have no specific in-stone plans. I'd love to get to the stage where I can hire an editor or like a film buddy, so because right now it's all me, and it's it can be a little bit exhausting to try and keep up with all of, the short form content, the long form content, try and do like 10 things at once. And as a content creator, I feel like there's always more that you could be doing. There's always more platforms you could be on. And I've also got Chinese social media, so I'm also dealing and managing that side as well. So yeah, so maybe one day I'll have a little team and get some cool merch like you guys have. Love your logo, by the way.
We haven't sold a shirt.
You haven't?
Well,
I'll be your first buyer.
Well, then we'll send you the link after this. But I was going to say, I personally, and I don't know Viv's stance, but I look on with such, respect to have someone like yourself, and I'm a very proud Chinese. I think a lot of people who know me know that. Like, I think I've spent so much of my childhood not wanting to be affiliated with it, that seeing someone like yourself come in and just do such like an amazing job of, showcasing, the country that I'm from. I'm actually forever grateful for the stuff that you do. And I know you're doing it from I'm just doing it for myself and I'm just going out there and I'm just, making it happen. But, there's also an element of you could easily just not do it and still have a great time. So, putting in the work to make this happen, I think is something that's really, I wanted to, highlight as something that's really important. I'm going to jump around a little bit because one thing that just came to mind as well was, what were your parents' reactions when you told them you wanted to live in China and do this whole thing?
I'm very, very lucky that my parents are just the most supportive people. They're my best friends and they've only ever had my back. And while they will help where they can and provide, their opinion, they've lived a lot longer of a life than I have. At the end of the day, they just want my sister and I to be happy and do what we want to do. So when I told them that I wanted to move to China, I had nothing but their support. And they are just so proud of me and what I'm doing. Like mum's a dentist and she'll tell all her patients oh, my daughter's in China, she's doing this and that. They're extremely proud of me and my sister and what we're doing. And so when I told them, there was no negative reaction at all. And especially my dad has always encouraged me to do what I love. He had a full career as a dentist and he's retired now, but it's only something I learned after he retired, that dentistry wasn't his favorite thing to do. And he did it for us, to send us to, my sister and I, both to private schools, working incredibly hard. And he just wanted to encourage my sister and I to do what you love. And so I've really taken that advice and run with it. And it's given me the freedom without the pressure to conform to a certain path, which has been so helpful because I already had a huge amount of societal pressures that I felt, unsaid pressures, going to a certain school, having a certain group of friends and expecting a certain salary, expecting a certain life path, and having my parents back no matter what, and them having my back no matter what, just meant that I had that net to fall back on. And yeah, I feel very lucky. And I also recognize how lucky I am to have that position, to have parents that can support themselves, and I have the freedom to do what I want. And if everything fails, I can fall back on them. And if you have that luxury, anyone who's listening to that, go for your dreams, because there are people in this world that don't have that luxury. So I feel eternally grateful for their support, and lucky to be able to do what I do and to have had the opportunities that I've had. And I recognize that was, I'm very, very lucky.
Yeah. A lot of the positivity sounds like it comes from, being raised in such a positive environment, and everything just feels so wholesome. And I guess being able to have that supportive network as well opens up so many opportunities for yourself or for anyone who might be experiencing that too. Just quickly before we wrap things up, I want to ask out of curiosity, because I know Ken's spoken about him being able to travel in China, but I have only gone to China with my family, or like we used to visit every single year before COVID. So I haven't been back since COVID. However, for anyone who is curious or hasn't traveled China before, or might have and wants to explore everywhere else, like, would you have a recommendation of a starting point or a few starting points?
Well,
because it could be a little intimidating for some people, I guess.
Yeah, I'd say China requires multiple trips, because, at a certain level, you do want to tick off those big locations. You want to go to Beijing, you want to go to Shanghai, you want to see the terracotta warriors. So I almost think like a first trip, tick off the big items so you don't have that voice in the back of your head, like, I'm here in a village in this province, but I still haven't seen, the capital or the Forbidden City and that kind of thing. So I'd say tick off the big ticket items, do the Beijing, Shanghai, go to see the terracotta warriors in Xi'an, maybe even make a trip to Guilin. The typical tourist trail, do the things, then come back for your second time and really just get in there. Like, even you could spend a year in one province, honestly. There's just so much to do and see. But some of my favorite places that are outside of the usual tourist route would be Sichuan province. I say Yunnan and Sichuan, do those two provinces. You could do a really great trip with just those two. Kan highlighted an amazing itinerary from Kunming to Dali to Lijiang and the Tiger Leaping Gorge, like fantastic trip. Get your way into Sichuan province, go to the border between China and Tibet, where the signs are both in Mandarin and Tibetan, and you can, live with Tibetan nomads, which is what I did. All I would say is that do not drink the yak butter milk, because you're not used to it, and it will cause you significant amount of diarrhea. So don't do that to yourself. But yeah, explore the food, and Sichuan and Yunnan both have incredibly diverse food cultures, especially Yunnan, because there are so many ethnic minorities that live there. So going from one area to another, you'll experience a completely different food culture and cuisine. I actually had one of the most amazing trips of my life in Yunnan province. So as I said, Yunnan is home to many ethnic minorities, and the Dai people, they celebrate the water splashing festival every year. So the biggest festivities happen in Sichuan-Banna, which is a bigger city in the south of the province. But I had the opportunity, I had a friend of a friend of a friend, one of those other kind of connections that was like, come to our smaller city. I think the city was called Mending, and 80% of that city is actually the Dai ethnic minority. So the whole town in a period of 4 or 5 days were just splashing each other. It was like a war zone of water. Kids on the streets with their water guns, splashing their elders, like an excuse to be cheeky. People in these like pickup trucks with 4 or 5 people in the back just splashing water on people walking the streets. It was like nothing I've ever experienced before. And in those areas, the food culture is very, very interesting, because they eat a lot of raw food, including raw meats, which is very different from a lot of the rest of China that is very opposed to eating raw, like raw vegetables and stuff like that. So yeah, there's so much. I could talk for a year.
I love how excited you get about everything, and the way that your face just lights up about, and just filling in the gaps of, this province has this, and this is why it's this, and this is the history. We just wanted to wrap up as well. Like, are there any words of advice you'd be able to give someone who is, a younger generation, or looking to change careers maybe, or is interested in following something similar to you? Like, what piece of advice would you be able to give them?
I'd say if you have the luxury to follow your passions, do it. Like, just try. And I think a lot of the pressures we feel, maybe in a city like Sydney, it's a lot of competition and a certain amount of pressure to succeed or work here, work there. Realize that those are all made up rules, and you don't have to worry too much about what your friends and family think. If you have a passion, you only get one life, so may as well try it out. And I'm not only talking about people who are younger. If you're older, decades older than myself, and you have a passion, just try it, because you never really know where that path is going to take you. And I would never be where I am if I wouldn't have taken that scary plunge to go back to China and learn Mandarin. So yeah, I like to think of life like a big tree, and all the choices that you take can branch off into a whole other direction. And I'm always thinking, this choice I'm making today to go out for a coffee, will that take me in some other strange direction? So I'd say just go for it. I would encourage everyone to come to China and experience just for yourself. And never judge another culture by your own cultural viewpoint. That would be the biggest thing I've learned in my years of traveling and living in China. Just because we do it a certain way in Australia doesn't mean that that's the right way. An alien coming to Earth would be like, why are they doing this? Or why are they eating with a fork? Like, that's so random. Where is there this clampy utensil? Like, every place is different, and there's no right and wrong. There's just different. So I would encourage everyone to just get outside their comfort zones, try something new, and try not to think of, oh, this is bad or this is good. Just, it's different. And I think that's a very important viewpoint to have if you come to China, because it is different, especially from Australia. But that's what I love so much about it. And people maybe looking to get into vlogging, advice I would have is don't strive for perfection, because you're going to, no matter what, look back on your first videos. And I don't know if you guys feel this way about your podcast, but you'll look back on your first couple of episodes and be like, oh, the quality was awful. The mic was here and the lighting was there. And, oh, how could we do that? But you learn on the job. And my dad actually has started making YouTube videos, and because he loves walking, so he wants to share that and on his YouTube channel. And even in the last few weeks that he's been doing it, he's like, oh, I wish in my first video I had not put the text on like this. And you learn on the job, and just go for it. Just start putting out content. That's just some advice, I guess.
Amazing. All right.
Thank you so much for sharing everything and bringing your super positive energy and just making sure everything feels so nice and light and fun today. I'm sure Can say the same. Like, I've had a lot of fun. I've been so interested hearing your story too, and just hearing all your experiences in China, but from such like a positive light. Again, like Can said, the media, same with you, Amy, like you've said, that the media may not paint the same picture as if you were to be in China. But yeah, if any of our followers, where can they find you if they don't already follow you?
So I'm just Blondie in China on all my platforms. On YouTube, give me a follow. On Instagram, I'm Blondie in China. On TikTok, also Blondie in China. If you want to check out some on my Chinese social media, for anyone interested, I'm Amy Fan, which is basically Amy loves rice, because my name is Amy in Chinese, which is love rice. So I've made my Chinese handle Amy Fan loves rice.
That's so
so yeah, you can check me out there on Bilibili, Weibo. I post once a week about my adventures here in China, and in a few weeks, my adventures from Italy. So please like, follow, and comment.
We'll leave everything in the show notes as well. But yeah, thank you so much for your time, Amy. Hope you enjoyed this podcast, because we enjoyed it so much.
So honored. Thank you so much for having me. And I feel honored to be your first non-Asian guest, and to be able to share my experiences as a foreigner living in China on your podcast. And big fans of the show. And I'm just wishing you guys all the best. And thanks so much for having me.
Thanks so much for tuning in. A lot of work and effort goes into Level Asian, with a whole team behind the scenes. While we aren't looking for anyone to pay for this content, what helps the podcast grow, reach more people, and benefit more Asians around the world is if you could leave a 5-star review if you're on Spotify, Apple, Google, or any other audio platforms. And leave us a like, comment, and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Catch you on the next episode.